I just unmute myself. There we go. Right. I think Mitch has said pretty much most of the introductions already, but from myself, just thank you all for attending. Tonight should be quite an interesting talk to hear from the Corinthian Club and to hear from our guest speaker, John, regarding the tomb of the unknown warrior. So if you've attended before, thank you. If you are new to attending, these socials are just a way for us to spotlight new and young Mason clubs, not just across England, but we've also got new and young Mason clubs across the globe joining us, and also women Freemasons as well. So it's great to kind of that these socials are encompassing everybody as we go along. So we like to spotlight the clubs, and we also like to inform with our guest speaker. So we do have the Corinthian Club, and Adam will be doing the guest speaking spotlight this evening. You'll have the chat panel below to ask any questions that you have for Adam, and I'm sure he can, answer those, or he can answer them a bit later, depending on how tricky you want to make them. We'll then hand over to John, and then we'll have some time for Q&A, which I think, Mitch, will you be hosting the Q&A, or Matt's doing that this evening?
Yes, I'll be doing it tonight. Matty's been on the source all day, I think, in the sunshine.
Yes. Okay. And then we will finish just after 9. So we try to keep that as our rule. No longer. We don't want it to kind of drag out into the evening because it's Sunday, and we want you to kind of, get back to having a nice relaxing time before you get back to work on Monday. So I'm going to hand over to Adam from the Corinthian Club to carry out his presentation. Adam, over to you.
Thank you, Barry. I'm not sure who's sharing their screen right now, but if they could stop, that'd be great, and I will. Fantastic, thank you. And got some slides for you. So ultimately, I'll say good evening, everyone, and firstly, a huge thank you for inviting us to present to you this evening. So I've got 10 minutes to give you a whistle-stop tour, really, of who we are, what we're about, our achievements to date, and what's next, really, for the Corinthian Club. But first, a little bit about who we are. So we are the New and Young Masons Club for the Chorley and Leyland Group, who are part of the province of West Lancashire. And we support not just lodges, but also chapters as well. And we were formed on the basis of 2 New and Young Masons clubs, previously named the Leyland Lights and the Chorley Blues Brothers, which were coming together as part of the groups that amalgamated as well. So a bit around the faces behind the brand, so you know who we are. So first up, we've got our president, who joins us this evening as well, who is Neil Ward. Similar leadership style, you could say, to Donald Trump. I don't know. We'll let him tell us later. But ultimately, Neil keeps us on our toes. We've also got our vice president as well, who is Mike Silver. And basically, both just ensure that we're all kept in line. More importantly, that we continue to move forward as well. And then we've really got the ops team that make everything that you see happen. And a few of them are with us this evening as well. So we've got our main man, who's Wayne, is our chairman. We've got Mark, who keeps us in check as our secretary. We've got Nigel, that makes sure I don't bankrupt us, as our treasurer. You've got my good self as the event secretary. And then our latest addition, looking after all things really brand and design for us, is Kieran Taylor Bradshaw as well. So what are we about then? So when we were forming the club, we looked at all the clubs in existence today. And then more importantly, we engaged with all the prospective members, and we did that via online surveys, picking up the phone, speaking to them. And our real first question was, do you want a New and Young Masons Club? And then if you do, what do you want it to deliver for you? What do you want it to achieve? So fortunately, everyone said they wanted one, so they kept us in a job. And then secondly, from what they told us they wanted us to deliver, this helped us really form our vision. And this was very much focused, and what the feedback we got was not just being about Freemasonry and everything Freemasonry, but being more inclusive. So bringing friends, bringing family, and getting everyone involved to share the good that Freemasonry really brings. And our mission then, as a club that we set out, is to provide a platform. So that's what we're here to do. So a platform for new and young Masons to embrace one of our core principles of friendship. So we're here to provide that new social circle outside of the lodge, The lodge room that provides learning opportunities, but also then helps you advance with great foundations and also knowledge of Freemasonry. And we've got really, 3 key aims, which are enable people to meet newly initiated brethren, both within their own lodge and at social events, to assist new brethren as well in forming friendships with other members of the club, which we hope obviously lasts for many years to come, and also to enable members of the club and their non-Masonic friends as well to meet socially outside of the lodge. So that's what we're here to do. That's our mission, and that's what we always come back to whenever we're putting on events or doing anything together as a club. So we then set out really, right, what are the 4 key areas and our priorities that we really want to focus on? So the first was very much a little bit like this event tonight around learning and development. So what can we do? What can we put on that will help people learn and advance in knowledge of Freemasonry and in general? Second is, of course, social. So social being one of our core principles, what we want to achieve, what we want to help out, and how we do that in the current pandemic as well. Third was around charity and community engagement. So actually, one of our roles we see is taking Freemasonry out into the community, normalising it, and also, getting people involved and spreading the word. And then fourth was around Masonic functions. So we form a Masonic calendar of visiting, both within our group, but then taking that wider to the province, and then obviously further afield as well, as much as we can. So with all of that, we'd done all of that background, we'd set all that scene, it was time for us to launch. And we were reluctant really as a group to launch an events group because our launch was in July and that was in the midst of a pandemic. So, but we knew it was critically important really for us to ensure that we did launch to keep brethren and gentlemen engaged with the fraternity in a way that was fun and engaging. And after all, these clubs are a great asset to our membership team and we know our role there. So to do so, we wanted to ensure that we created a digital platform that provided that safe space for all of our members, but also one in which we could track who was actually a member, and a platform that was more engaging for us than just social media. So that's why we decided to choose something that enabled all of this. And of course, our choice was TeamApp. So TeamApp is our core platform, and more importantly, it is completely free, if you don't mind some annoying ads every now and again. And it allows us to have membership at different levels. So we can have people join the club, and we have 3 different levels that we have set. So we have an associate member of non-Mason. So anyone who isn't a Mason can join the club. We have an associate member who is a Mason, but outside of our Chorley and Leyland group. And then we have a full member status as well. And that is a Mason who is part of the Chorley and Leyland group. What that allows us to do in having that membership structure and sign up and validation of people coming on means we can target and understand our membership base clearly. So then we can obviously focus our attention on specifics rather than assuming and trying to please all. We can get feedback, we can get insight into our people. And those groups also mean that we can advertise and restrict access to events, news and chat based on the membership level a person has. So we can have news content just relevant for our Chorley and Leyland group, full members, and then we can have content that's relevant to all, including non-Masons as well. And really the key features of this app, and it comes with website, you've got app for mobile devices as well, but it allows us to manage our events, so hosting and sign up, track attendance, etc. There's chat rooms, there's a news feed, there's a merchandise and online shop area, there's polls and surveys, functionality that you can run so we can constantly gain feedback, document management, and then there's a gallery as well to store loads of beautiful pictures of our members as well. And of course, though, we understand the importance of social media. So we are present on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram's our latest. Don't really do much on Instagram yet, but we'll see. That's one to take off. We got it registered so no one else steals the name. So let's have a look since our launch then. What have we done since July 2020? So we have now acquired 160 members, and we've had a steady stream of growth since our launch. And our focus really is to continue on growing this, and with our membership structure it enables us to do this. There isn't a cap on our members in terms of who we can have, because our membership structure means any of you today on the call can join the club. But one thing we do plan on doing is not losing sight of our core focus, which is ensuring all of those new and young Masons that are part of our group are active members. And we work really with our provincial team to ensure that we are doing that. So since our launch, we have held 9 online events. And we've got another 7 events in the pipeline. So that takes our calendar currently into May 2021. Funnily in line with Boris's COVID lockdown exit strategy, but no, we didn't have any inside information before you say. And these events involve the launch of our bi-monthly club quiz that we're now doing, and obviously many guest speakers. Our events on average obtain between around 30 and 60 attendees. And we were honoured to have the 3rd Grand Principal of the Supreme Grand Chapter and the Provincial Grand Master for the Province of South Wales, Gareth Jones, who's been a UGL lead for New England Masons clubs as well, attend and officially open the club, so to speak. Also in January, we hosted the New and Young Masons mini monthly conference as well. And going forward in March, tomorrow, going forward, we're also fortunate to support and assist in the running of the first virtual West Lancashire New and Young Masons Forum. So we'll be doing that as well. So we might have only been around 8 months, but we've certainly been busy. And this slide not only shows that, but it does also show you the date that Kieran joined us to look after all things branding. So my blue and white backgrounds weren't quite cutting it, so we got some new graphics made up. But you can see that for the latest ones that Kieran did. So what does the future, I suppose, have in store for us as a club? So continued membership growth, that's going to definitely be one of our focuses. We're going to launch a website as well, so we can focus on that, taking it out to the community. So that's currently in design, alongside the events as well. And we're going to focus on developing more engaging online content. So looking at doing blog posts and all of the things that we can do to deliver on the priorities that we really set ourselves. And looking forward for events, we sort of see this as a blended approach that we'll do. So as the way forward, when running any workshops or physical presentations, we'll use technology to stream these to allow us to keep those further afield members still involved with the club. So that is a whistle-stop tour into us, which I hope you have found useful and insightful. And ultimately, I'm around now to take any questions that you guys may have.
Thank you very much, Adam. That was brilliant. Very well done. So we have some questions. We're going to first go over to Lee Bushby of the Dunkleys of Bristol.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I just obviously with the app itself, I've just seen, is that quite easy to set up and use, or is it a bit more complicated than what it looks like?
It is quite easy to set up, to be fair. So we did some digging, we did some comparisons. You know, there's a rugby club set up within West Lancs as well. They were doing some research on apps. I think they chose a different one in the end, but for us it was really simple. Configuration's quite easy in terms of the back end of the system. But yeah, as long as you can get your way around sort of setting up any sort of database type system and fields and properties and stuff, it's quite easy to do.
Cheers.
No worries.
Great question. Over to Matthew Brown of Prawsome Semper in Gloucestershire.
Hey Adam, thank you for the presentation. That was awesome. My question is, what do you find was the best strategy to increase membership numbers from the day that you started? And what would you say, I know it's fairly new beginnings, but what would you say is your percentage of active members?
So I'll take the last one first. So in terms of active members percentage, probably active, you can track that in the app, so you can track who's checking in as well, and probably 50 to 70% of our members are active. We can see who's got notifications turned off and on and things like that. So you can also track if you're bugging people or not. And what the app also allows you to do is if they turn notifications off, it'll default to mail reminders. So the person gets an email instead, which is really helpful. In terms of what allowed us to get our name out there, you know, we use social channels. We looked at all the other clubs that are out there today, and you know that engagement on social in terms of Twitter, retweet, etc. is really useful. We were fortunate to have 2 mailing lists from the 2 clubs as well that we could use to get sign up, but we started from a blank database in terms of building the app up. and use the channels that we had. But one of the best assets you've got is your people and your members themselves. So, you know, it's important to tell your members and remind your members to actually go out there and speak to their friends, family, check is their connection involved, etc. That they know who recently joined Masonry, and try and link into the province to understand members who you haven't got. So that's what we're doing at the minute, is doing some analysis versus who is a light blue, so to speak, in terms of our group, and who of them now are members. And if they're not, you know, we'll pick up the phone and talk to them. So that personal touch and connection, you also then give that person sort of personal accountability to join as well. We found works really well.
Have you found that province has helped you out somewhat in terms of rallying people up in your own province yourselves?
Yeah, completely. So the province helped all secretaries for lodges. So, you know, our secretary, Mark, has been secretary for a lodge as well. So that's good. He had that network within the secretaries themselves to get our message out there. But yeah, province has been really supportive. So, you know, our provincial grand secretary, Andrew Rydell, who looks after all things. He was part of one of the founding clubs, obviously, in London, etc. as well. So New and Young Masons clubs, and seeing them be successful is probably helped us a lot as well.
That's brilliant. Well, cheers for that, Adam, and good luck.
No, thank you.
Great. The next question, Jack's iPhone asks sort of the same question as Dan from the Northampton Hunts NOMC, so we'll let Dan take over this question.
Yeah, hi Adam. Just wondered, I know obviously you've got different membership levels, but what are the requirements for your actual members as far as, you know, do they have to be light blues, or do you accept provincial rank, etc.? And is there a cost involved to being a member?
Cool. So thanks, Dan, for that one. So in terms of membership structure, to be a full member, so to speak, you just need to be a Mason, part of the Chorley and Leyland group. So what we say is we're not going to restrict a dark blue or a person of rank, etc., joining the club. But what we will do is ensure that all of our content and what we deliver in terms of event-wise will be focused on the light blue New and Young Masons, and we will look at the qualities. So we capture job role, etc., and hobbies and interests. So we will ensure our events are always tailored to our market, so to speak. But we're not going to restrict anyone that, you know, as soon as you become a dark blue, etc., or you know, that's why we very much take the New and Young Masons rather than light blue perspective. So our events will target on that. We don't restrict. And from a cost perspective, it is all completely free as well. So we don't charge any member. We had a look at a proposal, and we did ask when we did our surveys, would anyone join? And generally sort of a £5 to £10 mark was sort of always banded around of what people would do. As we move to physical events, we may look at charging a member's fee and then doing discount on that for the events that we put on. So that's been our thoughts around it. But because everything's been virtual and our running costs have pretty much been zero, apart from the time and effort of all the team, it wasn't also right, we thought, to then charge at that point. And we'll do merchandise and various different things. Everyone loves a pin badge or some cufflinks, of course, which will put some money on for that to invest in anything we need.
Cheers, mate. Thank you.
Great question. Okay, from Northampton Hunts to the Isle of Man, and Dave Wilson from the Isle of Man Light Blues Club.
Hi, Adam. First, thanks for that talk. That was very interesting. Thank you. I just wanted to know, how much direction and involvement with the club does your provincial team have, and how does that work, and how is it received with your members?
So in terms of when we formed, we presented to our chairman and vice chairman and a few of the key stakeholders of the group to keep them involved and stuff. So they're always one, let us know what you're doing, fully support everything that we are doing as well. But very much leave it to what they've said is, you know, you are a club for New and Young Masons, so we want you as New and Young Masons to form and take that club on its journey, because you'll, rather than it come from the top down, this is what we want, actually, you should know what you guys want. So off you go, go and do it. And if you need anything, we're here. So you've got that support around that. And, you know, Neil is probably our real key link to ensuring that we always stay on the right track. For we don't go off in any wild directions. Not that our ideas get crazy anyway, but and keeps us linked in. And Neil obviously heads up sort of membership as well for the province. So it's sort of that real good link that we have as a team with them. But yeah, really, really supportive. But no, you know, they they'll only get involved probably if we're going to do something that will be too edgy.
That's great. Thanks, Adam.
No worries.
Amazing. That's all the questions for you, Adam. You'll be pleased to know.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
A very insightful talk, and we've certainly learned lots of lessons. I'm going to hand back over to Barry Hayward now, who will carry on.
Yep, thank you for your patience, Reverend. I was running around my house kicking everybody off the Wi-Fi because I think everything's had a massive meltdown. So yeah, I'm back. So yeah, Adam, that was fantastic. Brilliant speech, really competent. Such interesting stuff. And the parts that I missed, I promise you, I'll catch up on YouTube afterwards. But I'm going to head over to our guest now, to John. And John, if any of this is incorrect, you can blame Mitch because he sent me this today. So I've just got a small intro for yourself before we start. Mitch is going to say something funny. Go on.
Thanks for looking out for me as usual, Barry. You know who your friends are. That's all I'll say.
So brethren, we're pleased to have Right Worshipful Brother Reverend Dr. John R.H. Railton with us this evening. John graduated from university with a degree in agriculture. He became a banker for some 22 years before being ordained as a parish priest within the Church of England. His wife Sandy is also ordained too, and between them they have 4 children and 9 grandchildren, and I can see some busy babysitting duties after lockdown for yourself and for Sandy, and they both live in Wiltshire. John was initiated into Freemasonry some 43 years ago, and his current active offices include the Grand Scribe Nehemiah in the Royal Arch, the Grand Prior of the 33rd degree of Ancient and Accepted Rite. His past ranks include past Junior Grand Warden and past Grand Chaplain in the craft, and Knights Commander of the United Orders of the Temple of Malta, as well as other orders beyond the craft. So you sound like you're not only 9 grandchildren, John, you are quite busy in Freemasonry too. So it's an honour to have you here, and we are really looking forward to hearing your story. So over to you.
Very kind of you, Barry. Thank you very much. And thank you, Mitchell, as well, for inviting me to participate in the meeting of the Sarsen Club this evening. I need to say initially, I've talked on a number of occasions on this subject, the inception of the tomb of the unknown warrior, but usually to a live audience, if I may put it that way. A couple of years ago, I started preparing a PowerPoint presentation to go with the talk. I've not used it until this evening, but Mitchell very kindly organized a tutorial for me to show me how to do it and how to share screen, which is something I've never done before either. It sounds to me as if most of you are well used to doing these things. So any cock-ups are down to me. I just hope it all goes smoothly. So I'm going to try now to share my screen, and then off we go. I think.
I'm just going to blame Barry for this if it doesn't go right in return.
Right. Well, there we are. For the last few years, many people's thoughts have been on the events of over 100 years ago as the so-called Great War reached its climax, and on those countless men and women who have died in the service of this country in that conflict and others since. Some of you may have watched the TV programme in July 2017, marking the centenary of the Third Battle of Ypres, the action at Passchendaele, just a few miles northwest of the little town of Ypres, where the daily act of remembrance is still observed at the Menin Gate. Just over 100 years ago, a humble army chaplain was still mulling over an idea which had come to him after a battlefield burial some 4 years earlier. It was the idea which eventually led to the creation and dedication of the famous memorial in Westminster Abbey, which we all know as the Tomb of the Unknown Warrior. So the focus of my talk is on the outcome of 2 events, the first almost 104 years ago, and the second almost 100 years ago. Right, the first, there we are. Next slide. David Railton was born in Leytonstone in northwest London on the 13th of November 1884, the elder son of George Scott Railton, the first Commissioner of the Salvation Army and William Booth's first lieutenant. Shortly afterwards, the family moved to Margate, where his mother continued to live until her death in 1925. George, the father, and David, the son, shared a strong Christian faith, but seemed to have had little else in common. While David respected and admired his father, they were not close. George seems frequently to have been an absentee father because his work for the Salvation Army often took precedence over his family responsibilities. Indeed, it was something of a disappointment to George that neither of his sons followed in his footsteps and joined the Salvation Army. David and his younger brother Nathaniel, born in 1886, were both ordained in the Church of England and both served as army chaplains during the First War. David graduated from Keble College, Oxford in 1908. He was ordained the same year and took his first curacy in the slum parish of St Dunstan, Edge Hill in Liverpool. It was there that he met his wife, Ruby Wilson. They married in September 1910 and moved back to Kent, where David was appointed curate at Ashford. In 1913, he moved to a curacy in Folkestone, and soon after the outbreak of war the following year, became acutely aware of the suffering of British troops who had embarked for the front at Folkestone, which was also the route by which wounded personnel were repatriated. He had some military experience, having served as a part-time soldier in the Oxford Volunteer Battalion when he was at Keble College and during his curacies in Liverpool and Ashford, and clearly felt a strong calling to enlist for service in the army as a chaplain. He joined up in late 1915, having been commissioned as captain. He landed at Le Havre on the 8th of January 1916 with the 18th Tyneside Pioneers Battalion of the Northumberland Fusiliers and reached the West Front on the 11th of January. His battalion became part of the 34th Division, and David later transferred to the 47th Division. He served with the Tommies in the trenches for the duration of the war and witnessed all the horrors of the Somme and Passchendaele. He was promoted major and appointed senior chaplain of the 19th Division. His faith, his compassion, and his courage are all evident from what survives of his wartime correspondence with his wife Ruby, which contain many deeply moving accounts of ministry on the battlefield. It was in October 1916 that he was awarded the Military Cross for his part in saving an officer and 2 soldiers from certain death in the Highwood action on the Somme a month earlier, on the 15th of September. He was later twice mentioned in dispatches. But it was still earlier in that year, not long after his arrival at the front, that the seed of the idea of a tomb to an unknown warrior was planted and began to germinate in his mind. David published an article in a monthly magazine called Our Empire in November 1931, in which he describes vividly how the idea of the tomb to the unknown warrior was conceived. I came back from the line at dusk. We had just laid to rest the mortal remains of a comrade. I went to a billet in front of Erkingham near Armentières. At the back of the billet was a small garden, and in the garden, only about 6 paces from the house, there was a grave. At the head of the grave, there stood a rough cross of white wood. On the cross was written in deep black penciled letters, "An unknown British soldier," and in brackets underneath, "of the Black Watch." It was dusk and no one was near, except some officers in the billet playing cards. I remember how still it was. Even the guns seemed to be resting, as if to give their gunners a chance to have their tea. How that grave caused me to think. I love every inch of Scotland. I had served in the earlier days as a private soldier in the ranks of the Scottish Territorial Battalion. How I wondered, how I longed to see his folk. But who was he and who were they? From which of the lonely mystic glens of old Scotia did he come? Was he a citizen of Auld-Reekie? Was he one of the grand old contemptibles? Was he just a laddie, newly joined, age 18, the only son of a shepherd from the far-away Highlands? There was no answer to these questions, nor has there ever yet been. So I thought and wrestled in thought. What can I do to ease the pain of father, mother, brother, sister, sweetheart, wife, and friend? Quietly and gradually, there came out of the mist of thought this answer, clear and strong. Let this body, this symbol of him, be carried reverently over the sea to his native land. When the war had ended, David returned to his curacy in Folkestone. The idea had stayed with him throughout the war and after the armistice, but he was reluctant to do anything about it, mainly because he thought that an idea from a humble padre would be unlikely to find favour with those in authority. For a long time, he contemplated writing to the general officer commanding British forces in France and Flanders, General Sir Douglas Haig, but in fact never did write. Some historians have claimed that he did write and that Haig simply ignored his letter, but David Railton's own account dismisses that. He also considered writing to the Prime Minister or to the Archbishop of Canterbury or even direct to the King. But it was with the encouragement of his wife Ruby that eventually in August 1920, 2 years after the war ended, and just before he moved from his curacy in Folkestone to his new appointment as Vicar of Margate, that he wrote to Bishop Herbert Ryle, the Dean of Westminster Abbey, suggesting that the remains of an unidentifiable serviceman, an unknown comrade, be buried in Westminster Abbey as the representative of the tens of thousands who had died in the war. Dean Ryle quickly embraced the idea and replied after only 3 days. He then approached first Buckingham Palace and then 10 Downing Street. King George V wasn't keen at first because he felt that 2 years after the armistice was leaving it a bit late to hold a funeral. But Lloyd George received it enthusiastically and pursued it energetically because it fitted so well with his own idea of a national memorial, which Sir Edwin Lutyens had been commissioned to design and which is familiar to us all as the cenotaph in Whitehall. It's interesting to note that it was Lutyens who suggested that the memorial should be known as the cenotaph, a word which means empty tomb. Interestingly, in his first letter to Lloyd George, Bishop Ryle appears to claim credit for the idea himself. However, my belief is that he had picked up on David Railton's anxiety that the suggestion of a lowly former army chaplain would be dismissed out of hand, and recognised that an idea from the Dean of Westminster Abbey might have a little more credibility. Bishop Ryle wrote to David Railton on the 19th of October to advise him that the Prime Minister would be making an announcement that very afternoon in the House of Commons. Quoting again from his article in Our Empire, "The only request the noble Dean did not see his way to grant was the suggestion I gave him from a relative of mine that the tomb be described as that of an unknown comrade rather than warrior. I preferred that title as I thought most people might think that warrior meant soldier, whereas it means sailor just as much. Also, it seemed more homely and friendly. But the reason his suggestion wasn't pursued was probably to avoid any risk of association of the word comrade with the growth of communism. Matters moved very quickly thereafter. Once the proposal had been adopted and the public announcement made, only about 6 weeks after David Railton first wrote to Bishop Ryle, a memorial service committee was established under the chairmanship of Lord Curzon, the Foreign Secretary. Arrangements were made swiftly and orders were issued. On Sunday, the 7th of November 1920, 4 separate parties of soldiers, each consisting of an officer and 2 other ranks and driving a field ambulance, were sent out to military cemeteries on the 4 principal battlefields, Somme, Aisne, Arras, and Ypres, to exhume 4 corpses. They were identified as British by their boots and buttons, but even if their ranks were known, they were not recorded. It seems probable that as many as 20 corpses were actually exhumed, but those whose identity could be established were immediately reburied. The unidentifiable corpses were sewn into sackcloth, taken to a temporary chapel at Saint-Paul-sur-Ternoise near Arras, each exhumation party arriving at a specified time to eliminate any possibility of communication between them. The bodies were laid out on trestles and covered with Union flags under the supervision of the Reverend George Kendall, an army chaplain who had been sent out from London. The next part of the story is from the personal account of Brigadier General Louis J. Wyatt, who by this time had succeeded General Sir Douglas Haig as GOC British Forces in France and Flanders, as set out in his letter to the Daily Telegraph in November 1939. At midnight on that Sunday night, after the chaplain and the exhumation parties had dispersed, General Wyatt entered the chapel with a member of his staff, Colonel Gell. He pointed at one of the 4 covered bodies. He and Colonel Gell then lifted the corpse into a prepared plain deal coffin shell and secured and sealed the lid. The chapel remained under guard overnight. The following morning, Monday the 8th of November, the other corpses were reburied in a shell hole on the road to Albert, according to General Wyatt's account. Other historians have suggested that they were actually reburied in a nearby military cemetery. The deal coffin shell containing the unknown warrior was taken by field ambulance from Saint-Paul to Boulogne, where it was received with full military honours by the French. 2 undertakers from England placed the deal coffin shell inside a coffin made of English oak from a tree felled at Hampton Court, bound with iron bands and with a crusader's sword, the gift of the king from his personal collection, affixed to the lid. On Tuesday, the 9th of November, it was prepared for transit back to England with full military escort and accompanied by 100 sandbags of French soil. The coffin was transferred to the Royal Naval destroyer HMS Verdun, which sailed with a French naval escort, and 6 British naval vessels took over escort duty in mid-channel. While the destroyer HMS Verdun was broken up in 1946, its ship's bell has hung in the nave of Westminster Abbey since 1990 and is rung every weekday at noon to remember the dead of all wars. On Wednesday, the 10th of November, HMS Verdun docked at Dover, and the coffin was transferred to a train which made its way to Victoria Station in London. Every station platform and bridge on the route was packed with crowds paying tribute as the brightly lit train passed by in the dark. The roof of the carriage bearing the unknown warrior had been painted white for ease of identification. At Victoria Station, the coffin remained on the train at platform 8 and under guard overnight. On the morning of Thursday, the 11th of November 1920, the unknown warrior travelled by gun carriage from Victoria Station via Grosvenor Place, Hyde Park Corner, Constitution Hill, the Mall and Admiralty Arch for the ceremony of the unveiling of the cenotaph in Whitehall at precisely 11 a.m. The Union flag covering the coffin was the one used by the Reverend David Railton throughout the war, both as an altar cloth for services on the battlefield and as a shroud at the battlefield burial of soldiers killed in action. After unveiling the cenotaph, the king, in the service uniform of a field marshal, laid a wreath on the coffin and then walked in procession behind it to Westminster Abbey, where at the end of a moving hour-long service, the unknown warrior was buried at the west end of the nave, and the grave later filled with the soil brought from France. The grave remained open for 7 days before a temporary slab of York stone was placed in position, with David's flag laid at the foot of the grave. A year later, the temporary slab was replaced by the engraved slab of black Belgian marble, which covers the tomb today. At the service to mark the occasion, David Railton carried his Union flag to the altar in Westminster Abbey, where it was dedicated and then laid up in the nave of the Abbey, close to the tomb of the unknown warrior. It remained there for 32 years, until 1953, when it was moved because it obstructed the view of the cameras filming the coronation. Several attempts over the years to have it restored to its original position over the grave have come to nothing, and it has hung ever since in St. George's Chapel nearby. The concept of a tomb to an unknown warrior was picked up almost immediately by France and later by the United States and many other nations. A dedication ceremony took place on the same date at the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, and they were followed by similar memorials at Arlington Cemetery at Washington in the USA and others worldwide. Tombs of unknown soldiers of other nations have since been dedicated in Australia in 1993, in Canada in 2000, and most recently in New Zealand in 2004. But the original idea came from David Railton's experience near Armentières. David Railton moved from Margate to take up a post as curate at Christ Church, Westminster, and then later took various other incumbencies, retiring in 1945 at the age of 61. He and his wife moved to his beloved Scotland, to a house called Ard Roo, which means high point, at Onich on Loch Linney, near to North Ballachulish, and about 9 miles south of Fort William. He was still very active in retirement and a much sought after preacher. Indeed, on 3 occasions, he preached for the royal family in their private chapel at Buckingham Palace. In 1955, at the age of 70, he fell from a train as it approached Fort William Station and died from his injuries. His funeral was in St. Bride's Church at Onich, and his grave lies in the churchyard there, where his wife Ruby was also buried 11 years later. Ruby and David Railton had 4 daughters, Mary, Ruth, Jean and Frida, and a son, Andrew, Frida's twin. The second daughter, Ruth, is well known as the founder of the National Youth Orchestra. The son, Andrew, also served in the army and saw action in the 39-45 war. My father was also in the army during the First War, having joined up as soon as he reached his 18th birthday in March 1918. He joined the Honourable Artillery Company, in which his older brother was an officer, but declined a commission. But he didn't get out to France. He had completed his basic training, but his first posting was guard duty at the Bank of England in Threadneedle Street and billeted at the Tower of London. His posting to France had just come through when the armistice was signed. But I do know from my conversations with my father before his death in 1989 that he and David Railton were in frequent touch with each other during the early to mid-1920s, and I believe they met several times when David was still a parish priest in Kent and my father was a schoolmaster in Essex. They had often talked about the tomb and the way in which the idea had been conceived and progressed. It was clear that my father found David to be an inspirational character, even something of a role model. It was only after my father died and I became curious about this history that I made contact with David Railton's son, Andrew, who was living at Waltham St. Lawrence, southwest of Maidenhead, with his wife, Margaret. We never met, but he and I had several interesting telephone conversations in 1989 and 1990. He and I could both clearly recall our respective fathers talking of their correspondence between the wars, and we had both understood that they had worked out exactly how they were related. but neither of us could be sure of the answer. David Railton died in the year 2000 at the age of 80. As and when I've had the opportunity, I've been trying to work out exactly what the connection is. Unfortunately, my father, being a meticulous organizer, and in an attempt to simplify his affairs and leave them in good order in 1988 and 89, when he was dying of leukemia, got rid of much of his accumulated paperwork, but being registered blind, probably didn't realize how precious much of it was. All I found was this clipping from the Daily Sketch for Saturday, the 13th of November 1920, with a photo of David Railton. I since obtained a copy of the whole of the relevant page, much of which was devoted to various stories about the unknown warrior. This was perhaps the most moving story. 2 soldiers in hospital blue were arrested by a constable as they were passing through Hartley-Wintney in Hampshire on the Wednesday, the 10th of November. They had only 2 shillings between them and had walked over 60 miles from Neckley Hospital and intended to do the 100 miles on foot to lay 2 laurel wreaths on the cenotaph. Each had a brother posted as missing in the war. A military escort took them back to Neckley yesterday. That would have been Friday the 12th. But as they were due to be mobilized on the Saturday, they still meant to make the pilgrimage. David Railton's grandson, also David, is a barrister practicing from chambers in Fountain Court in the City of London. He and I talked on the phone several years ago and exchanged a number of emails. I'm not quite there yet, but I'm not far short of establishing exactly how the 2 branches of the family are connected. The final words, however, are again from David Railton himself. No one knows the unknown warrior's rank, his wealth, his education, or his history. Class values become vanity there. He may have been wealthy, or one whose home was a slum. He may have been a public schoolboy or a gypsy. Many people have not yet grasped the fact that he may have come from any part of the British Isles or from the dominions or colonies. And there's still a good few who do not realise that he may have been a sailor. The Royal Naval Division served in France. It contained a good few men who had served on the sea for most of their lives or during the early part of the war. Besides this, there were a good many men who served in the marine services and who subsequently joined the army. He may have been one of the clergy of the church who served as a combatant officer or in the ranks. No one knows what his profession was. He may have been, till his country called him, one of the idle rich. It is quite likely that he was a communicant of the church or a Roman Catholic, a Jew, a Salvationist, a Wesleyan, a Presbyterian, or a member of any other or of no religious denomination. And of course, although David Railton didn't say so, I suppose the unknown warrior could have been a flyer, could have been a member of, what was it called, the Royal Flying Corps, because the RAF only came into existence right at the end of the First World War. Brethren all, thank you for your attention. I hope you found that interesting. If anybody wishes to ask questions, I will be more than pleased to do my best to answer them.
That was absolutely fascinating. Thank you, John. I think remembrance of the war is such a Remembrance Sunday, and just remembering those kind of really awful times during World War One, and this story is so fascinating because it's giving people a focal point for remembrance from all those people that died so far, well, not so far away, but for some countries it was. So I just found that fascinating story to share, and thank you for doing that. I don't know how many questions we've got, but Mitch, I can hand that over to you.
Great. Yep, we've got a fair few questions. Brethren, if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat and we will get to you very shortly. John, fascinating, as I thought it would be. The first question comes from me. Why do you think the king was so reluctant, in the first place to agree to this this actually happening? Because I've done a bit of research, and he was quite reluctant in the first instance to
the only reason I know of is because he felt that for the passage of 2 years after the armistice, as I said, was leaving it a bit late to have a funeral. One of my colleagues the grandfather of one of my colleagues on the Supreme Council, Lord Wigram, was one of King George V's private secretaries, and handled some of the correspondence between Downing Street and the Dean of Westminster and the King. But I haven't come across any other clues to the King's reluctance. I think it was simply that he felt that too much time had passed.
And another quick question: do you think very little is known about John, particularly since his death and since the idea came to him? Because it was such a great idea that that almost they thought, oh, this is brilliant. Let's get the ball rolling. That obviously there was a world war on at the time, so it wasn't that easy to to maybe include John so much. Do you think that's maybe one of the reasons why we don't know so much about him?
What about David?
David, sorry, yes.
Well, I mean, a fair amount is known. A number of books have been written about the unknown warrior. I have a number of them, not immediately to hand, but quite a lot is known of the story. I've just extracted the oddments of information to put the talk together for occasions such as this evening. But there is a lot known about David and his career and what he did.
Fantastic. We're going to head over to Matty Brown. You've got a question, Matty?
No, I didn't have a question.
Oh, beg your pardon. Barry, it's you. Go ahead, Barry. Your question. Sorry.
Easily mixed up. In your talk, John, you said that the grave was left open for 7 days. Is there a particular reason for that? Is that a religious thing?
I don't think it's a particularly religious thing. No, I think it was just so that people, I mean, over the week, many thousands of people made a pilgrimage to the Abbey and paid their respects at the grave. And I think that's probably why it was left open, so that people could look into the grave and see the coffin. And it was after a week that the soil was put in and the temporary York stone slab was put on it. I think that's the only reason, just so that people could actually see the coffin when they came to pay their respect.
So was the idea of bringing the soil from France, you said, wasn't it? Was that idea brought at the same time? So was the soil moved with the body, or was that a later thought?
No, the soil was brought back on the same ship, to the best of my knowledge, from France to England, and I think the thought was that the unknown warrior had been buried initially in French soil, and for him to be buried in French soil in England would just be an appropriate thing to do.
Yeah, nice touch. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Okay, we're going to go over to Lynn Chow from America Lodge over in Washington, DC.
Thank you, Mitch, and thank you very much for that presentation. That was absolutely amazing to hear that journey. My question is more of a curiosity question. I know in the United States, with the advent of DNA technology, we finally did identify the unknown soldier that is buried in the tomb of the unknown soldier here in Arlington, Virginia. Has there been any move to identify the unknown warrior in the UK?
Absolutely not. The remains of the unknown warrior have been sealed ever since the evening of Sunday, the 7th of November, 1920, when one of the 4 bodies was selected, and that body was put into the deal coffin, and the lid was put on it and sealed. So there's been no access to any part of the remains since then. And I'm quite sure that any attempt to try exhumation to get a sample of tissue would be very, very strongly resisted. I think the key part of the concept is that this body is unknown. Nobody knows. I think in a recent talk I said even the gender isn't known. I suppose it's possible that it could be a woman, I don't know, but nothing is known, and certainly there is, to my mind, no possibility of DNA matching to be done to identify them. I was sent a copy of a book recently called The Name Beneath the Stone, which was pure fiction, but it told a fascinating story of how it might in theory have been possible that somebody could have worked out who it was, but that was pure fiction, and I'm absolutely convinced that there is no way that the identity of that body could be established.
Thanks. I personally agree with that sentiment, being a Navy veteran. So it was almost disappointing to know in the United States that we had discovered who it was, because you kind of lose the solemnity that's associated with having an unknown soldier. So thank you for the explanation.
Yeah. I agree with you, Lynn, and I think part of David Railton's idea was that any of the thousands who made a pilgrimage to the grave could, as they walked past the grave, think, well, it just could be my husband, son, whatever, in that coffin. So truly the representative of the many thousands who died.
Thank you, Lynn, for that question. We're going to head over to Somerset and the Adair Club. Craig, could you ask your question, please?
Hello, good evening, Mitch. John, a very insightful talk. I really enjoyed that. Thank you so much. I'm just going to read the question I wrote because I'll never be able to recall it again. In the American War Cemetery in Normandy, France, the one that we all know from the start of Saving Private Ryan, there is a wall there and it has names of soldiers who were killed in action, but their bodies were never identified. They just weren't ever recorded as coming back in, so they were assumed dead. Is there a connection with the tomb of the unknown soldier as an identified body, or at least an example of it, with these people that were presumed dead and never found?
Not that I know of. I've never visited any of the cemeteries in France, but a lot of the headstones simply say a British soldier of the Great War. No, so there are thousands of graves where the occupant has not been identified, and presumably it was from those graves that the bodies were exhumed. But if when a body was exhumed, there was any information found on the body which could be used to trace their identity, then that body was immediately reburied and another one exhumed. Which is why I said it's possible that as many as 20 bodies could have been exhumed, but they finished up with just the 4 that were taken to St. Paul. But I'm not aware of any link with the memorial wall at the cemetery you mentioned.
Thank you.
Brethren, it is 9 o'clock and we do take this opportunity every social to raise a glass to absent brethren. I'm going to pass over to Alan, who will take a quick shot. Or we do, brethren, we don't say anything particular. We just raise a glass to those who are no longer with us or can't be with us for reasons, personal reasons or whatever else. So 9 o'clock, I'll pass over to Alan. Alan will take a couple of pictures. If you could raise a glass when he tells you to, that'll be great.
There's going to be two shots because there's 2 screens. So first of all, if everyone can raise their glasses, then I've got the first one, and then keep smiling. Here we go with the second one. And done. Thank you, brethren.
Great. Thank you, Alan. We're going to go over to the Wiltshire Lodge of Fidelity, and Paul Robinson, could you ask your question, please?
Hello, John. Thank you. That was a fascinating talk. Really enjoyed that. I have a very good friend, Andy Richards, who wrote a book on the subject called The Flag. Did you actually help Andy write that or research it, or have you become involved in research of other books?
Andy contacted me and picked my brains a little bit when he was writing the book, and he acknowledged me actually in the acknowledgements at the front of the book. I'm not quite sure why, because I don't think I was much help to him, so I can't claim to have helped him in writing the book, but we were in touch, yes. And I've got a copy of it. I've got a copy of it and thoroughly enjoyed reading it.
Brilliant, thank you.
Great, thank you, Paul. We're going to go over to Nick Juice of the Manchester Level Club. I think you touched on this, John, but we'll get Nick to ask it anyway. Over to you, Nick.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening. A absolutely brilliant talk. I was really looking forward to it. Just really two-part question. One, why was he selected? And two, what did they do with the other bodies? Were they just reburied where they fell?
Why was he why was he selected? Well,
yeah, out of the four.
The decision, we don't know that. What we know is that the four bodies were exhumed at the cemeteries. They were sewn into sackcloth at the cemeteries. They were then transported by field ambulance to the chapel at St. Paul, where the four corpses were laid out on trestles and covered with Union flags under the supervision of the Reverend George Kendall, who was an army chaplain sent out for that purpose. And it was at midnight on that Sunday that Louis Wyatt, General Louis Wyatt, and his ADC, Colonel Gell, went into the chapel. Wyatt pointed at one of the bodies. Nobody knows which one, and there's no way anybody could know which one. And the two of them lifted that corpse into the deal coffin shell and secured the lid. The other three, and the chapel remained under guard then overnight. On the following morning, the other three bodies were taken out of the chapel and were reburied, well, in Wyatt's account, in a shell hole on the road to Albert, but actually we believe they were reburied in a local cemetery, a local war cemetery. So that's what happened to the three other bodies. And the one selected, as I said in the talk, was taken to Boulogne and thence to London.
Thank you for that.
Great, thank you, Nick. Over to Matthew Brown of Prorsum Semper.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much for that fascinating talk. Just from me, do you think the Tomb of the Lost Warrior memorializes the horrific events and loss and obviously great sacrifice of loved ones to a point where realistically knowing who it is would lose the symbolic meaning of why it was done? Surely not knowing who it is allows us all to think that everyone is equal despite creed and finance, etc., because everyone ultimately made that ultimate sacrifice at the end of the day. It doesn't matter who you were.
Absolutely right. I think that's the whole point, that if by any means the identity of the unknown warrior were to be established, it would destroy the point of the whole thing. The fact that it's unknown means that any of the families who lost a loved one in the war could perceive the possibility, at any rate, that the unknown warrior could be their relative. And that's why it's such a powerful symbol of all those who died in those conflicts.
Absolutely. Thanks again, John.
Thank you, Matty. Back to Barry.
John, you were talking about your connection to David and kind of finding out how you were connected. What sort of steps have you taken to establish that connection? Are you looking at kind of ancestry, DNA, that kind of thing?
Not DNA, no, and no. I mean, the website I use is called Find My Past, but I mean, I'm aware that there are a number of family research websites that one can use. To be honest, I'm not giving a huge amount of time to it now. I enjoy doing family research and building the family tree, but I mean, I would love to find out exactly what the connection is, and one day I might make it, but not so far. The frustrating thing is that I do know that my father and David Railton, as I said, were in frequent touch in the early 1920s. And from what my father told me and from what David told his son, both Andrew and I both believe that they had worked out what the connection was. It's just that they didn't leave us any notes about it. So we got to start from square one. And I'm no great expert at this research, but it's fascinating. It's not the end of the world if I never find out. It would just be quite interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Great question. John, we could talk about your Masonic career in huge lengths, and it is quite interesting. And but I won't maybe touch on too much of it today. But it's always interesting. I always find it interesting to find out how how you got into Freemasonry to start with. And you said it was some 43 years ago that you joined. What was your avenue into Freemasonry, and what have you learned subsequently?
My father was a Mason, and I believe his father before him as well. All through my childhood, I knew that Freemasonry was something which was very, very special to my father. I have memories, because he was deputy headmaster at the local grammar school in Banbury in North Oxfordshire, and I have vivid memories of coming home from school. Dad would disappear upstairs, he'd change, put on a dark suit and a black tie, and come down with his little case and go off to a lodge meeting. And words like lodge and chapter and KT and mark and arc mariner were familiar in our household. It was something that he didn't talk about, but my perception of it was that it was something very special. So I always knew that one day I'll be a Mason. I think he was quite disappointed that I didn't approach him as soon as I was 21. But when I was 21, I was about to get married. I was embarking on a career, and I've got lots of other things to do. And it was only when I was, in my early 30s, I suppose, that I eventually did something about it. But another reason was that in the early part of my career in banking, and I embarked on my banking career in 1967, so it was towards the end of the 60s, I discovered that most of the men whom I met in the course of my career, and for whom I came to have greatest respect as people of integrity and honesty and high moral standards, turned out to be Freemasons. So that also gave me a very positive image of Freemasonry. And that's what I found Freemasonry to be. I mean, it's one of the best things I've ever done in my life, becoming a Mason. I was initiated at the age of 33, and I've never looked back.
Fantastic. And like I touched on, you've had such quite a huge career in Freemasonry, which is just goes to show how much you love it. In a nutshell, what has been your highlights? What has been your top moments of your Masonic career to date? There's a lot of aspiring younger brethren and newer brethren here today who join these socials and are still sort of finding their way and finding out different things that they enjoy. We know why you've joined Freemasonry, but what have you put into it? We know you put a lot into it, but what has been your favorite moment so far in your 43 years?
I think when I became a Mason, I had one aspiration only, and that was to go through the chair of my lodge. And because I was commuting from Hampshire up to London every day, so I had to take a half day's holiday out of my annual leave for every lodge meeting, and my lodge met every month. Rehearsals were on a Sunday morning, which after I was ordained became a bit of a challenge because rehearsals clashed with Sunday services. But I had the opportunity to go into the chair fairly quickly because I always attended lodge of instruction and rehearsals and never missed a meeting and so on. And I suppose because I think I was ordained when I was IPM of the lodge in 1985, and I was quickly drawn into a variety of other orders, particularly the Christian orders. but craft was my first love and probably still is. I mean, there are other orders which I love as well, particularly, as I've said, the Christian orders, Knights Templar and the Ancient and Accepted Rite in particular. So in a sense, those are highlights. But, you know, the greatest honor I've ever had in Freemasonry was when I was appointed Grand Chaplain, and then a few years ago promoted to Junior Grand Warden. I did a year active Junior Grand Warden, which was a tremendous honor. And the other role I have now, which is also a massive privilege, is that I'm one of the members of the Supreme Council of the Ancient and Accepted Rite 33rd degree. So those, I suppose, are the highlights. I had a great time. Love every minute of it.
We need to wrap this up, John, but just a quick one on that note of the Supreme Council. I know very little about it, but it's one of those things that always sort of, my ears always prick up when I hear about it. Am I right in thinking there's 7 members of the Supreme Council?
There are 9.
Oh, there are 9. Can you just explain a bit why there's so few members of this committee and how you got to be a part of it?
The Grand Constitutions of, I think it's 1786, prescribed that the order should be governed by a Supreme Council consisting of 9 members. So what was the logic behind 9 members? I don't know. In theory, the 9 members are all equal. We are all 33rd degree. You know, we don't have a single Grand Master, as happens in the craft and the other orders. You know, the high ruler is the council as a whole. Why was I selected? Well, because I'm ordained and because I'm a Grand Officer in the craft, and that's the other requirement, that to become a member of the Supreme Council, you have to be a Grand Officer in the craft. I could say I was in the right place at the right time.
It's so interesting. I'd actually like to hear more from you, but I think we'll save that for another social, maybe, if you're willing. And finally, John, like I said, we need to wrap up. But what would your advice to be to any new and young Mason who's just joined and finding their feet? COVID hasn't been, you know, helpful to anyone in Freemasonry. But what have you learned, and what has changed since you joined, and what is easy for you then that maybe isn't easy for new and young Masons now?
One is technology. I mean, you are all very familiar with all the technology. I struggle with it. I struggle to keep up. And social media, I know absolutely nothing about. So that's one big difference. Another big difference, I think, is that 43 years ago, when I joined, employers were very understanding about their employees participating in community activities, and it was quite common for people who were in Round Table or Rotary or whatever to be given extra time off. I'm not suggesting that Freemasons are given extra time off, but employers on the whole will be quite tolerant if you asked for extra time off or to leave early or whatever to attend a Masonic meeting, because the role of Freemasonry in the community was widely known and welcomed. What advice would I give? Don't be in too much of a hurry. I've come across so many people who've got through their 3rd degree in the craft, and they've had people leaning on them to go into Royal Arch, Mark, etc., etc. My advice would be, take your time. Make sure you can pursue your Masonic career in your own time, and don't be leaned on to do things until you're ready to do it. That way you'll enjoy each step of your Masonic career all the more.
You heard it here first, folks. Reverend Dr. John Railton. That's the end of the Q&A. I'm going to hand back over to Barry, but thank you very much for being so willing to answer the questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll just wrap up really quickly, because we've gone a bit longer than we normally would, but such a fascinating subject that I think that we probably needed to tonight. First of all, thank you to Adam from the Corinthian Club and the rest of the Corinthian Club members for turning up. We hope to see you on the next social, and hopefully that's something to do with the Supreme Council and the 33rd degree. I think that's definitely something we could learn more about. Reverend Dr. John Railton, thank you so much for that talk. And we'll get this up on YouTube, because I've had a few messages already to say to people they want to rewatch that and they want to see it because they wasn't able to attend. So we'll get that up. That's a job for Mitch and Alan, I guess, quickly. Yeah, and that's it from us. So thank you for everybody who attended this evening. It's been brilliant, and I'll give you back your Sunday. So thank you, everybody. Take care. Stay safe. See you soon.